Welcome to Echoes from the Past, an event brought to you by the American Foundation for the Blind and the Dot Experience with the American Printing House for the Blind. We now take you live to New York City.
Greetings from the Center for Jewish History in New York City at 15 West 6th Street, West 16th Street in Manhattan, New York, New York. It is March 17th, 2025, and we're here today to celebrate the first listening of the audio recordings from the time capsule that was planted 20 feet beneath us where we stand now, here in this building, which at the time was the newly built headquarters for the American Foundation for the Blind. AFB occupied this space from 1935 until our departure in 1997. We are so thankful for the Center for Jewish History that has opened their space today. To begin our presentation and our event here today, please welcome the President and CEO of the American Foundation for the Blind, Eric Bridges.
Well, good afternoon. My name is Eric Bridges, and I am so happy to have you all with us today, both in this room and around the world streaming live. This place served as AFB's headquarters for over 6 decades. And wow, a lot went on here to better the lives of individuals who are blind, have low vision. Let's start with thank yous. Number one, thank you so much to the Center for Jewish History for their hospitality and their generosity for this day to be a reality for us. Also, I want to thank very much the teams at the American Printing House for the Blind, as well as my team at the American Foundation for the Blind, for all the work that went into creating this day and making it a reality. Many of you know that Helen Keller worked for the American Foundation for the Blind for over 4 decades. And during those 4 decades, a lot went on in the world. She was an optimist, also a realist. She did a lot of travel. Over her 4+ decades of time with the American Foundation for the Blind, she flew to over 30 different countries. So it didn't matter, though, if she was in Nagasaki, Japan, or in Jerusalem. She always looked forward to coming back to this office space in these halls to be with her colleagues, to continue to make a difference in the lives of individuals who are blind, low vision, or deafblind. As we look at this actual structure, it was first a townhome that has grown and grown through the decades. One of the individuals that actually was responsible for most of what went on under this roof for the last several years that it was in existence as our headquarters is a gentleman named Walt Decker. And Walt Decker is here with us today. Walt, thank you so much for your time and your service to the American Foundation for the Blind.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
We're so glad that you could be a part of this day as we look ahead at looking behind. Isn't that wild? So much has gone on these last many decades, and so much has been captured from the past. And that's a big part of why we're here today. In 1934, December 5th, 1934, MC Miguel and Helen Keller played a significant role in putting the brick in the cornerstone of this building, as well as encasing a time capsule. This time capsule was unearthed by Mr. Decker in the late 1990s. And in 2021, as part of our centennial gala, was opened. And among its contents were 2 silver records. One side of one of the records actually goes back to 1934, to that very day of the cornerstone laying. It has the voices of individuals from the New York Times, MC McGill, Holly Thompson, as well as Helen Keller, which is quite unreal. I will say that a critical part and partner who's been with us along the way to help steward the items in the time capsule, but along with the AFB archives and the Helen Keller archives, are our colleagues and friends at the American Printing House for the Blind. They've served a critical role in assuring that these artifacts are restored and kept in their proper functioning order. And I'd like to thank them very much for their partnership in all of this. And it gives me great pride and pleasure to introduce to you today the CEO of the American Printing House for the Blind, Dr. Craig Menner. Craig.
Thank you, Eric. All right. Hello, and what a great day. Since our beginnings in 1858, the American Printing House for the Blind has fulfilled its mission of being a support to the blindness community through the creation of products, services, and programs. Over the years, we have found many partners to help us fulfill our mission. And in kind, we've been a help to other agencies in supporting their work as well. Our partnership with the American Foundation for the Blind stretches back, I probably think, over 100 years, or close to it. I know you just came up on your 100 years, but I think we were there together in the very beginnings. And AFB has endowed many gifts to APH over the years, such as our talking books, which originated with AFB. And when they decided to shift course, that was sent to the American Printing House, which has been a staple of part of our production since that time. And most recently, in 2019, APH was selected as the caretaker of the Helen Keller archives. This rich collection of artifacts and papers tells a story of struggle, recognition, and triumph throughout the lived experiences of an amazing individual that did not let societal expectations or political pressures limit her reach and impact. Helen Keller reminds us all that this work is a lifelong commitment to justice, assuring that all individuals with disabilities can achieve their highest potential. I want to thank Eric and the leadership of AFB and for their many years of friendship. I want to thank Justin Gardner, our archivist at APH and historian in charge of maintaining the Helen Keller archives, and through his efforts have produced this amazing piece of history we will hear shortly. And finally, I want to thank the center here for extending this welcome to share this moment in their facility. And at that point, I'm going to hand this back to you, Eric, to hear a little more.
All right, well, thank you very much, Craig. The Center for Jewish History is celebrating its 25th anniversary this year. It's quite amazing when you think about that we stand just steps away from Helen Keller's office, what was her office for many, many decades. And the fact that just steps from there is a new installation and exhibit honoring the life and impact of Anne Frank. I was in the bookshop and actually purchased 3 books for my children this afternoon about Anne Frank. And it's quite humbling to know that those 2 women during this month of women's history are going to be honored under this roof. Quite powerful. I had the opportunity to take a look around and get to meet a lot of the folks that work here. And this is an impressive place that really shows the richness of the Jewish faith in New York City. It's now my honor to introduce for a few words the president of the Center for Jewish History, Dr. Gabriel Rosenfeld.
Thank you so much, Eric. Thank you, Craig. Thanks to everybody for being here. I'm Gabriel Rosenfeld, the president. I'd also like to acknowledge my CEO, Rio Daniel, who's sitting there alongside our chief archivist, Andre Filomonov. We are profoundly honored this afternoon to welcome the American Foundation for the Blind back to the center. We've been here for 25 years. You obviously got the jump on us for many, many decades in advance of that. But it's an extraordinary event. We couldn't be happier. I'd also like to, of course, welcome the American Printing House for the Blind, about which we've just heard as well. Helen Keller's legacy extends far beyond the groundbreaking work in accessibility and disability rights. She was also a staunch advocate for justice, human dignity, and freedom. Her deep connection to the Jewish community is reflected in her outspoken opposition to the Nazi dictatorship of Adolf Hitler, especially the regime's book burnings in 1933, and her steadfast belief in the power of ideas to overcome tyranny. Helen was also a strong supporter of the State of Israel, visiting the country in 1952 and praising its commitment to accessibility and education. She admired the resilience of the Jewish people at a very difficult time in their history and lent her voice to causes that aligned with her lifelong mission of inclusion and opportunity for all. It's fitting, therefore, that this historic building, that this historic recording are together being unveiled in a place that once housed the American Foundation for the Blind headquarters, where Helen worked for decades. I'm extremely grateful both to AFB and APH for sharing this powerful moment with us and ensuring that Helen Keller's voice continues to inspire future generations. So thank you so much. I will turn the microphone now back over to Eric. Thank you, Eric.
Well, Dr. Rosenfeld, please don't go too far. I've asked our Chief Operating Officer, Sonia Shiflett, who's the remaining team member of AFB that worked in this building, as a matter of fact. We have a small token of our appreciation for your hospitality today. We have what you referenced, actually, the letter, a copy of the letter that Helen Keller wrote to Adolf Hitler and the German students that were burning Helen and others' books. With that, I'd like to recognize Sonia to read the letter and the inscription.
Dr. Rosenfeld, it is an absolute honor to present this reproduction of the letter that Helen Keller wrote. It's presented to you and the Center for Jewish History from the American Foundation for the Blind and the American Printing House for the Blind, in gratitude for your hospitality and in friendship and appreciation.
Thank you so much, Sonia. This is a remarkable gift, and it really does establish a line of undeniable continuity between your organization and ours. We'll treasure this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And for those of you who don't have the opportunity to read that while you're here today, this was a cablegram from Helen Keller to Adolf Hitler and the student body of Germany, dated May 9th, 1933. History has taught you nothing if you think you can kill ideas. Tyrants have tried to do that often before, and the ideas have risen up in their might and destroyed them. You can burn my books and the books of the best minds in Europe, but the ideas in them have seeped through a million channels and will continue to quicken other minds. I gave all the royalties of my books for all time to the soldiers blinded in the World War with no thought in my heart but love and compassion for the German people. Do not imagine that your barbarities to the Jews are unknown here. God sleepeth not, and he will visit his judgment upon you. Better were it for you to have a millstone hung round your neck and sink into the sea than to be hated and despised of all men. Helen Keller.
Quite a powerful letter. Now I'd like to hand it over to our MC, Tony Stevens, to introduce the first audio recording of the day.
Thank you. The following audio recording is taken from the first silver disc that was recovered in the time capsule as part of the 2021 AFB Centennial Celebration. It is a recording of the ceremony itself that took place 20 feet beneath us on December 5th, 1934, the laying of the cornerstone of this building here at 15 West 16th Street, New York. Please roll the audio.
Echoes from the past, a recording of the cornerstone ceremony. A picture fades in of MC Miguel, president of AFB in 1934, Helen Keller, and Dr. John Finley, assistant editor of the New York Times, at the laying of the cornerstone of AFB's new offices at 15 West 16th Street. They are standing in a room that looks as if it's still under construction. Together, Keller and Miguel hold a trowel, and Keller also holds a brick.
We are speaking now from a room rough-walled by its first plaster, with bare beams overhead and lumpy cement for a floor. The National Broadcasting Company is bringing you a ceremony in connection with one of the great humanitarian movements of the world. We are to hear this afternoon the addresses at the laying of the cornerstone of the new building of the American Foundation for the Blind in New York City. The Georgian building, fresh in new brick and cement, is at 15 West 16th Street, just off Fifth Avenue in Manhattan, and still is in the process of being built. The addresses will be by Dr. John H. Finley of the New York Times and president of the New York Association for the Blind, who also acts as chairman, Mr. M.C. Miguel, president of the American Foundation for the Blind, and the famous deaf-blind woman, Helen Keller. Trustees, friends, members of similar organizations and agencies, and blind men and women stand in the bare room before the speaker's platform. We turn you now to Dr. John H. Finley.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, both here and elsewhere, thanks to the National Broadcasting Company, we are able to send at the beginning of this ceremony a word of greeting to Mrs. Macy, Miss Sullivan that was, Helen Keller's teacher from her childhood, who is now herself in a hospital with blinded eyes. In the address which Helen Keller made in Glasgow on receiving the honorary degree, she said, "When I think of what one loving human being has done for me, I realize what will someday happen to mankind when heart and brains work together. Darkness and silence need not bar the progress of the immortal spirit. To that one loving human being, we send a message of gratitude from the sightless world and of admiration from those who have never known the pains of darkness. In all the annals of the race of men, from Homer's time till now, in all our ken, what no one else had ever done, you've done, wrought two great loving miracles in one. May vision, Mrs. Macy, may vision come back to you, but should it not, you must know that you have yourself given to the world a light that never was on land or sea, and that will never go out so long as the world keeps a memory of those who have wrought its greatest miracles of love and of skill. And now, Mr. Miguel, I turn to you. This building, whose cornerstone we are about to lay, is the gift of Mr. M.C. Miguel, the president of the American Association for the Blind. I congratulate him on having both the opportunity and the means to avail of it. The most advanced view of the ancients in their attitude toward the blind is expressed in the commandment in Leviticus, "Thou shalt put no stumbling block in the way of the blind." And in the verse in Deuteronomy, "Cursed be he that maketh the blind to wander out of the way." There was no suggestion that a helping hand should be given to the blind in their darkness. This building, in providing shelter for activities in behalf of the blind throughout America and in encouragement of local associations, is an intimation to the world of how far we have traveled toward the light. How blind old Homer would have hailed you, Mr. Miguel, but you will be thanked by untold thousands through the years to come. I wish I were a Homer to put their thanks into as immortal verse. Mr. Miguel.
Chairman, friends of the blind, we find ourselves gathered here today to commemorate an event which is but one additional stepping stone to the many that have marked in recent years the path toward removing the handicap of blindness throughout the world. Through close association and intimate knowledge of the world of the blind, we have come, dear friends, to consider blindness strictly in the sense of a physical handicap. We have seen through a lifetime of experience that when fair-minded people understand the problem of any particular race, they desire to share and thus lighten the burdens of those least able to carry them. How much more urgently needed is this sharing and understanding in the greatest of all races, the race of life. Through many years of close association with our blind friends, and by blind friends I mean our blind population as a whole, we are convinced that accepting this physical handicap, the sightless are not different from those in the seeing world. In proportion to their number, there are just as many average men and women, just as many below the borderline, and just as many intelligent, upstanding, capable men and women among the blind as there are among the seeing. I have had the great good fortune of personal contact with thousands of the blind in the United States and in other countries, and I know whereof I speak. Admitting then that blindness is only a physical handicap, it has been the function of our foundation, as well as of other associations, schools, commissions, workshops, and so forth, to endeavor as far as possible, through education, through employment, and through stimulation of both mind and body, to adjust, and by any and all means within our power, to offset the physical disparity of the blind. Nor has this education been confined to those physically without sight. The popular conception of centuries in the seeing world that a blind man or woman was only fit for the discard, a derelict, a broken reed, an incubus on society, had to be combated, not by propaganda, nor by sentimental or idle theories, but by education of the public mind, by a spirit of truth, and by actual demonstration of the intelligence and capabilities of the blind. This has been part of our labors. Today we find that there's hardly an avenue of life in which a man or woman without sight is not attaining success. They are occupying positions of trust and responsibility, calling for the highest quality of intelligence, as lawyers, merchants, members of the United States Senate, British Parliament, French Chamber of Deputies, as heads of institutions of learning. All the blind have needed was opportunity, and given this opportunity, within our own short span of life, an almost miraculous transition has taken place, not alone in the welfare of the blind themselves, but in the point of view of the seeing, as regards the blind. The American Foundation for the Blind, founded for the purpose of aiding the blind by creating opportunities for the advancement of their welfare, has endeavored to do its full share nationally and otherwise. The foundation exists only for this purpose. Almost from its incipiency, the foundation has had the great good fortune of collaboration and inspiration in all its labors from the great mind and genius of Helen Keller. She, more than anyone else, has given us our abiding faith in the blind and their capacities. To perpetuate the labors of the foundation and to encourage us to even greater effort and accomplishment, this edifice has been presented to us. It is consecrated to the service and welfare of the blind, and we here pledge ourselves to carry on by all means within our power so that the lives of our blind friends may be made better, richer, and happier.
Many years ago, when I first saw Helen Keller as a girl at a reception at the home of a friend in Princeton, she was told by Miss Sullivan, Mrs. Macy, by her fingers that I was next in line. But Helen had never heard of me, mistaking me for Finlay Peter Dunn, whose writing she knew. She said, as I shook hands with her, "How do you do, Mr. Dooley?" I am proud to say she now knows me by my own name. 2 or 3 of the most precious letters that I've ever had have come from her. She writes and speaks such beautiful English. I've often said that there are some advantages in being deaf and blind, for she has never heard an ungrammatical sentence or an ignoble word, nor has she seen an ugly thing in this beautiful world of ours. You have but to read her letter telling me of what she saw from the top of the Empire State Building to know this to be true. I was going to introduce her with a sonnet from our city laureate, Robert Underwood Johnson, but I'll save that to the end because I want you who are not here to hear every word, as well as those who are here, every word that Helen has to say. And now it is Helen. I was going to help her, but this conscience that I can't cover her. Go ahead.
Dark finally and the friends, deep emotions start within me. I feel like here the cornerstone of every coach ever called for the blind of America.
Dear Mr. Miguel, Dr. Finlay and friends, deep emotions stir within me as we lay here the cornerstone of our house of hope for the blind of America.
Beacon that will rise upon this cornerstone of the kindled by Mr. M.C. Miguel.
From the beacon that will rise upon this cornerstone of beginnings, kindled by Mr. M.C. Miguel,
will reign today the image of light, which will penetrate every corner of dark land.
will radiate beams of light which will penetrate every corner of dark land.
For nearly 50 years, Madam beloved teacher, and Sullivan Macy has been the light in my life.
For 50 years, Anne Sullivan Macy, my beloved teacher, has been the light in my life.
Now she is ill, and the darkness that covers me has fallen upon her. Still the light of her love shines amid the encircling gloom, and we are happy.
Now she is ill, and the darkness that covers me has fallen upon her. Still the light of her love shines amid the encircling gloom, and we are happy.
Thank you.
We make the transition now, but I will read for you who are here, even if those who are outside can't hear, this sonnet that I intended to read in advance, and I'm glad I didn't, because we might not have heard that last word, that precious word of Helen. Oh, not alone the awe, this is about Helen. The innocence life looked upon as never seen before, the world divested of its fret and roar, and measured trulier by each gentler sense. Not only wisdom, calm, and joy intense, honey from hives of universal lore, not only faith before the future's door, whence brood our doubts of whither and of whence, but that sweet spirit of courage and of cheer that shames our best endeavor with a smile, a patience as divine as ever led saints to the flame, no weak regret, no fear, guided by loving hands away from guile. Love is her labyrinth unfailing thread. Thank you. And now we pass to the placing of the box in the corner still. Have you the... Oh, is Mr. Latimer will first speak. Mr. Latimer. Mr. Latimer.
Chairman, Miguel,
Pennsylvania.
friends, they don't know a doctor, they should. As one who had some small part in the steps that led up to the incorporation, the organization of the foundation, who was its first Director General, member of its executive committee, and now a trustee at large, it's not surprising that I should take a very definite pride in the laying of this cornerstone. In my earliest conception of the foundation, inseparably interwoven was the dynamic personality of Mr. M.C. Miguel as the man to become the president of this foundation. It is again then not to be not surprising, but I take pride in the fact that it was, in some measure, my importunity that led Mr. Miguel to assume this arduous task. It is, of course, as it has been in many previous instances, Mr. Miguel's generosity that makes the laying of this cornerstone possible. There is, to my mind, however, and to the minds of all my fellow trustees, one sad note. That sad note lies in the fact that our first treasurer, Mr. Herbert H. White, is not living to participate with us in this happy occasion. In conclusion, in congratulating Mr. Irvin, Mr. Hayes, and the other members of the staff of the foundation, it is particularly gratifying to me in the contemplation of their work and their efforts to realize that the workers for the blind in general are becoming increasingly conscious of the excellent service that the foundation has rendered, is rendering, and is prepared to render through organizations for the blind and through its own independent research agencies. I am grateful for this opportunity in connection with the laying of this cornerstone to say these few words of commendation to all concerned and of my gratitude to Mr. Miguel himself. Thank you.
Are we unmuted? Yes. Oh, wonderful. We are back in the space where the event is taking place now in New York City at the Center for Jewish History. To my right, from the American Printing House, we have Dr. Craig Meador, Paul Schrader, who's Vice President of Outreach and Impact. Is that right, Paul? Impact and Outreach. My apologies, Paul. Next to him, the archivist for the American Printing House and also for the AFB and Helen Keller Archives, Justin Gardner. Thank you all for joining us from Louisville in Ohio. To my left, we have our Vice President and CEO, Eric Bridges. Next to Eric is our Chief Operating Officer with the American Foundation for the Blind, Sonia Shiflett. And after that, our former Executive Vice President, now retired from the American Foundation for the Blind, Walter Decker. I'd like all of us here just to share a little bit of thoughts on what we just heard, because this is the first time it's really been heard, other than some of the QAing to get us to this point over the past couple of weeks, since 1934 on December 5th. I know it was also described in image. I'll start with you, Walter, because that image might be very familiar to you, and sharing with us how we, if not for you, would probably never have received these audio recordings. Do you care to share a little bit about that and the image as well and tie it together with the time capsule recordings?
Yes, thank you for overstating my importance.
You're clever sleuths.
And people on my staff that were even more clever. The image that you talked about was the only thing we knew about where the time capsule might be, other than we knew it was in the cornerstone. But so it would be in the corner of the building. But that image that was shown had a picture of a window, and we figured it might be near that window. And that window looked a lot like the window to our right here. If you look at the frame, it's the same window. And the actual, when we were getting ready to move, we knew we wanted to retrieve the time capsule. We didn't know exactly where it was, and we own the buildings. We had a maintenance staff, and Ray McHugh, who was the head of our maintenance staff, I assigned him to try to find the capsule somewhere in the wall, and I can still remember that Friday afternoon getting a call from Ray. He had a very raspy voice, and that was the old phone, so you picked them up. Well, we have a problem. And I thought maybe he had trouble finding it. I think it's wrapped in asbestos. And it was. my instruction, Ray, go away from it. And that the next set of phone calls were finding hazmat people to take care of that. Ruined the whole weekend for several people, and we had to do testing before our staff would come back in the building, and we ended up putting it in one of the other buildings, I guess that way, 20th Street, that's connected to this building. And we had a big safe, that's where we ended up putting it until we actually moved. So it's the flood of connections to everything that was taught with that session. The desk, Helen Keller had, her office, I think, was upstairs. This area was the boardroom and CEO office, and the desk was used by the CEO as to my left was used. It was a very big wooden desk with railings around the side. And I could go on about things, but it was just it's a flood. I mean, if we have time on the side, I could tell some more stories. But the one point I wanted to get as I'm sitting here is that those of us that were there then, when we were working in this building and dealing with the time capsule and all the memorabilia, Helen Keller was very much not a memory of years past. I joined in 1988, she died in 68, so it was only 20 years after she died and that I joined. So her memory was very much alive, her feeling of it was very much alive. And the letter that Sonia read and presented was on display in this room. We had a little gallery in this room. And so we lived and breathed Helen, and she was very much, and so it's quite a rush of emotions. So I'll stop.
Thank you, Walt, and thank you for just helping it get to this point where we had a chance to hear this recording. I want to turn it also to Justin Gardner, the archivist, because we wouldn't be here without you as well to help you make those silver discs into audio we could actually hear. Justin, your thoughts and what you're hearing this first time?
Well, there are two things that come to my mind, and one is just being another part of your story that we just spoke about. The time capsule came to APH. It was shipped from AFB, and I wasn't really sure what was on these records. But there was kind of a problem that I had as an archivist when I was trying not to get myself too excited, because I've digitized a lot of things in my career. I did not want to digitize these because I didn't want to mess them up. I knew that these were one of a kind, and I was like, hey, I'm going to be back here in this archive by myself. I'm going to drop the record in the wrong place, and I'm going to destroy this thing. But what am I going to do with it? Because there was no way that I was going to send it off to somebody either. So luckily I did some research, and there was a place in Covington, Kentucky, which is not too far away. And I took an afternoon and I drove it over there and dropped it off at an archival digitization place called Casemakers. And it was pretty hard to leave it there. I was still a little bit nervous about that, but it was much better than having to send it off. I went back, I eventually picked it up after they had digitized it, and I didn't sit down and listen to it even then, because I knew that it was going to be very important. And I kind of took every 5 minutes, I would take a little sample of the audio just to make sure that it sounded good. But I knew I was just a little piece in this big story, and I didn't want to be the one person who sat down and listened to it before doing it. I did want to be that person, but I didn't do it. Now, when I hear her speak, this is another little bit interesting part as an archivist. In the archive, we have a transcript of the speech that she was going to give, and this is not it. Her speech was much longer. It was about 4 paragraphs, and it was kind of an historical survey of important cornerstones past. And she didn't say that, she didn't talk about that. She talked about something very personal. And the personalness of this message also brought to my mind a time when I believe she said one of her frustrations in life was that she couldn't master speech. But the emotion in her voice, I think, to me says otherwise. I completely understand with what she said. I completely understand why she would say that she never mastered speech. But when she says, now she is ill about Anne, that's more emotion than I would ever imagine from a time capsule. I would imagine an old newspaper and a couple of old coins. And this is something that's more, not only almost brings me to tears, but I can almost hear the tears in her voice. So I think that's something that's very special about the recording.
Craig or Paul or Sonia, Eric, other major impressions?
I
think this is Paul Schrader, and I actually had the pleasure of working for AFB. I'm a crossover. AFB, so APH, was not in this building. I think for me, the other part of this pleasure is getting to hear MC Miguel, actually, who did so much work that changed policies and lives and opportunities for people who are blind, as of course Helen did. I mean, they were such a great partnership in many ways. And Justin's right, hearing that emotion. But I can't help but think, in 1934, we're just sort of coming out of the depths of the Depression. There's still very much Roosevelt trying to inspire the nation and putting together programs to get people off their back and back to work. And here is this hopeful sign of this building being built, and the kind of support that the American Foundation for the Blind could muster in the 20s and 30s and 40s. And you see that in so many of the policies that came about that created employment and education and other opportunities for blind people. So it was really a time of tumult, but it was a time of hope. And without getting too much into the present, we're in a time of tumult and need for hope again. So I think it's interesting that here we are listening to history, and Sonia's reading of the letter just really had me thinking about how important it is for people to speak out and make their voices clear.
Craig or Eric or Sonia?
Go ahead, Eric. Sure. Well, from my perspective, it's quite astonishing. Down through the decades, language tends to evolve and shift. But when you listen to what MC Miguel had to say, the substance as well as the words that make up the substance, so much of that still applies today. The optimism, the realism, the belief and capabilities of people who are blind was really quite striking to me in listening to this today. And frankly, just the English language all throughout this broadcast, the professionalism of everyone who spoke, a lot could be taken from that in 2025, I would say, with regard to TV and radio and podcasts. It was quite something to listen to.
Just to echo off what Eric was saying there, I think the words of MC Miguel, and that's the challenge, which hasn't, I mean, there have been improvements. I think in the human race, we always have these sprints forwards and these fallbacks, and sprint forward and fall back, and you hope over time we've made up ground. But that challenge that he laid out about the need, the lack of resources, but more or less it's the lack of opportunity, and that might be due to ignorance, or that might be due to just misinformation, but the thing holding back people, especially people who are blind or low vision, isn't their abilities, it's denial of opportunities. I would love to say that's changed, but I know from the work that AFB does on a daily basis, the other consumer organizations, that is the hill they fight on daily. And I think unfortunately it's always going to be part of being a mission-based organization, is challenging mindsets, challenging hearts, and trying to move that needle forward. So it's to me that was the most stirring. It's like, because we're still living that. We're still living that as blindness organizations.
Well, as we begin to move on with the program for this afternoon, thank you, Craig. Sonia, any comments from you?
Yeah, I'm, as I anticipated, I would feel very emotional hearing the recording. And I feel as if the capsule opened and these very important historical spirits came forth. And they were not only historically important figures, they were very kind, generous, noble people who wanted to connect with us, and they just did. And from their kindness and generosity and conviction, I'm further inspired to go forth and continue their work. And it touched the head and it touched the heart.
Tony, there's this Paul, I just would want to add one thing. I'd feel remiss sitting here in the Center for Jewish History if I didn't point out, as a person who benefited himself from the work of so many temple sisterhoods over the years that did recording and brailing of materials of volunteers, the partnership between the Jewish community and the disability community has been so profound, particularly the blindness and vision loss community. The amount of effort that has gone into making books available over the years. And again, I know that as in my education, it was indispensable. So I do want to thank the center for that partnership.
As we move on to the final couple of audio recordings we want to share with people today, one will actually be that, as you mentioned, Sonia, folks from that time wanting to talk to us directly. As we take a walk up Broadway, we will hear from John Knight, the first person to ever narrate a book, a talking book, who was the first talking book narrator working for AFB Studios. We'll be hearing from him for a second. But before, the same way that we think of the center here as keeping Helen's spirit of justice and inclusion alive, we want to thank the American Printing House for keeping her legacy alive as well. And we're excited to share this real quick, a video which outlines how this and all the other archives that took many of them root here in this space are going to be forever remembered thanks to the DOT experience. So you may roll that video now, please.
Achieving a Dream, Helen Keller's Legacy and the DOT Experience. The Helen Keller Gallery at the DOT Experience will be the culmination of a beautiful dream. A dream that continues Helen Keller's legacy by sharing her important journey with the world through her personal artifacts, photographs, and her writings and correspondence. Justin Gardner, Helen Keller archivist, explains.
The archive started in 1932 with Helen and Anne and AFB. So Helen started working at AFB in 1924, and they decided to start a collection really for the purpose of exhibit. They even mentioned starting a museum in the original wording. Helen had a house fire in 1946, and that destroyed everything that was in her home, including a lot of writing she had done and a lot of correspondence that wasn't here in the collection. So luckily they had moved quite a bit to AFB already, and all of her things that she had done at work in the office at AFB were already there.
Since Helen's death in 1968, AFB has nurtured her collection, digitizing it and protecting it, even during some challenging times in history.
There was another catastrophe. There was an archive at Helen Keller International in New York, and that was destroyed in the September 11th attacks.
In 2019, a partnership with the American Printing House for the Blind, APH, was forged, and the archives were moved to APH in Louisville, Kentucky. This collaboration is making it possible for the world to experience and carry forward Helen's legacy in their new museum attraction. The DOT Experience is a model of inclusivity and a home to the AFB Helen Keller Archives. An entire gallery will be devoted to Helen's life and achievements. Visitors will be able to interact with the water pump, join Helen in her Arkin Ridge office, and sit at the desk where she wrote her groundbreaking books and articles, and travel the world to see her international work and souvenirs from Japan, Africa, Europe, and more. It is an attraction designed for everyone to enjoy. This opportunity to share her life could not be more relevant today.
Helen Keller worked with all of her heart for really all of her 87 years, but there are still those who want to remove and deny that legacy from public memory. And that's why this collection is so essential. If that can be done to someone as well documented as Helen Keller, then it can be done to any of us.
You now have an opportunity to play a meaningful role in making Helen's dream possible by supporting this first-class attraction that encompasses her life, her work, and her inspiring charge to the world. You can learn more about the DOT Experience or to donate at thedotexperience.org.
So as we begin to close things out, I turn back to you, our President and CEO of the American Foundation for the Blind, Mr. Eric Bridges.
Thank you, Tony. Well, I want to thank the folks from the American Printing House for the Blind. Craig, Paul, Justin, thank you very much for being here today and for the pivotal role that you play in helping the American Foundation for the Blind maintain its bountiful set of archives. Also, want to thank so many of our special guests that have joined us on the live stream today. And finally, the Center for Jewish History, thank you very, very much for your great hospitality today and for doing so many wonderful things in this much revered structure that we're in here in New York City today. I'd like for you all to go and visit www.afb.org/timecapsule to learn more about Helen's work, as well as the time capsule. afb.org/timecapsule, all one word, and please go check it out. We're going to leave you with a final video, or actually audio, not video, hello, that was recorded the same day as the cornerstone laying. As we heard before, Helen had a message to Annie Sullivan that she wanted to impart. This audio was taken on that same day, but it was to be revealed at some mysterious time and date in the future. So you'll hear John Knight, who was the creator of the audiobook, take us off the stoop around the corner and into Broadway and Manhattan, describing what he sees. You'll hear other voices, Jackson Cleaver, who helped to perfect the record. You'll hear all these voices, and it's again the first time it will be heard to the public. This was never aired on the radio. This was intended, again, for a group of individuals at some point in the future to hear about what was going on in Manhattan on this day, those many years ago. So join with me in sharing and listening to echoes from the past as we take a walk back in time. We will leave you now from New York City. Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you've enjoyed this gift that we've shared and are going to share with you. Be well and have a great day. Thank you so much for joining us.
Echoes from the past. An ear view of New York City and sounds of 1934. A picture fades in of the facade of the American Foundation for the Blind office building on 16th Street in Manhattan, NYC. An NBC truck is parked outside the building, with cables visible leading from the truck inside a second-floor window.
Ladies and gentlemen, who are perhaps the children of our children's children, the applause you have just heard signified the conclusion of the ceremonies which marked the laying of the cornerstone wherein this record was found. Within the limestone block, which we hope will have preserved for you through the years these voices and sounds of another time, you may find also the names and words printed and recorded of those whose efforts brought into existence what is to me, as I stand here, the beginning of a fine new home for an institution known as the American Foundation for the Blind. I, too, as a person, have a name. It is John Knight. But to you and for you of a distant time, be it 50 or 75 or even 100 years, I am the voice of this day and time in the city of New York, Wednesday, December 5th, 1934. It is 2:30 in the afternoon, and as I turn away now from the crowd watching the ceremony before these uncompleted and as yet untenanted walls on 16th Street, to walk northward along Fifth Avenue, my mind is filled with thoughts of those who may work there through the years, and of you, who listen to the sound of a voice whose source has perhaps long ago been forgotten. I am, for the moment, an historian, asked to present to another generation, through the unassisted medium of sound, what we have chosen to call an ear view of this city, my friends, and their thoughts and problems. What, I wonder, as I consider my commission, will you, my listeners, be like? And how did this record come into your possession? Did you take it from the moldering base of the building which today has yet to become a completed fact? Or did you find it still intact within the limestone sheath which lay among the other scattered blocks, all that remained from some great destructive catastrophe? By how many years are you separated from me? What are you like? And what are your problems? Well, Yours is the advantage there. You of the future may know what we were like and what we did. Yours are the audible, the printed, and the pictorial records. We of the present know nothing of you who are to come and your works. In our idealism, we founded this building, which is to house people who work for the benefit of those who cannot see even this world. In our vanity, we insisted that these records should be left for you, so that we who are gone may live again in your minds. All of the time that I've been reviewing these thoughts, my feet have been busy carrying me still further northward. I'm standing now on the northwest corner of Broadway and 23rd Street, preparing to journey uptown via what we call the BMT subway to the sound studios and laboratories and the present headquarters of the American Foundation for the Blind, where this record will be completed. But here, before we start, you shall have your first ear view of New York of 1934. I gaze across Madison Square at the star-shaped electric lamp atop a tall pole which burns eternally for the soldiers of this city who lost their lives in the Great World War of 17 years ago. Beyond the eternal light is a small park with benches, and not a few of these benches are the only homes of other brave soldiers of that World War. For 1934 is a year of depression, the fifth of the long, lean years which began with the business crash of 1929. Between me and the park, on the opposite side of Broadway, runs, spasmodically controlled by red and green electric signals, the vehicular traffic that is the life current of the city. Gasoline-driven passenger automobiles carry citizens more fortunate than I to or from their business or pleasure. The lumbering two-storied Fifth Avenue buses parade on their clumsy and noisy way to Washington Square. Small green police cars whose official occupants have just been notified by radio from headquarters of some neighborhood crime dash by with their sirens wailing. Oh, yes, it's a noisy and typical scene. Plenty of material here for your initial ear view. Listen for a moment to these sounds from the heart of the city as I turn the microphone toward the street. As I descend now to the subway level, 30 feet beneath the street, I shall not try to continue this conversation. The roar of the city above was bad, certainly, but down here it is bedlam as the noise of steel wheels on steel tracks, confined within the narrow concrete tube, drowns out all chance of conversation or even thought. Besides, these crowds thrusting against me in their impatience to reach the shopping center around 34th Street are pressing closer and closer. The train is coming into the station now, but later I will continue my observations from Times Square, which at this time still might be termed the theatrical and entertainment center. My, but it's good to be free of that crowd. As I started to tell you before boarding the subway train at 23rd Street, I've stopped off here at Times Square in order that you might be given an ear view of this section of New York as it is today. Beginning theoretically at 42nd Street, Times Square continues northward to 46th and forms the roughly rectangular axis around which revolves the theatrical and what we call the bright light section of the metropolis. About me, the city traffic roars as it did downtown a few moments ago, only at a more congested, somewhat slower pace. As I gaze northward from the rear of the building on 42nd Street, which houses the New York Times, today generally considered to be the outstanding newspaper of the nation, I see before me and on either side, mounted on top and in front of the crowded buildings, the electric signs which are designed to proclaim to Broadway's crowds the virtues of a score of the commodities of 1934. Wrigley's chewing gum, Chevrolet automobile, Pepsodent toothpaste, Camel cigarettes, Goodrich automobile tires, and many other names that are household bywords today. I wonder what, if anything, they will mean to you. The signs are drab and faded looking in the cold afternoon light as I walk northward toward 46th Street. But in a little while, as darkness falls, they will flash and glow in a rainbow blaze of color, contributing a garish halo to Times Square, which in the daytime seems haggard and worn and sinful enough. The signs above the motion picture theaters herald the newest talking movies. At the Rialto, for 25 cents, may be seen a motion picture called The Captain Hates the Sea. The huge Paramount Theater at 43rd Street in Broadway announces the presence of a film called College Rhythm. The admission here is 75 cents. At the Criterion Theater, one may view a production called The Battle, and the matinee admission is 40 cents. All of these are what we call talkies, in which the screen-projected images through the media of soundtracks on the original film and complicated reproducing apparatus seem to speak the words of the play. Today we read in the science columns of our newspapers of important steps in the development of color photography and three-dimensional pictures. Perhaps these may be commonplace to you. Motion pictures which entertain us are black and white flat shadows across flat scenery, except for movement, no different than the pictures you may have seen in the newspapers, which were preserved for you in the cornerstone along with this record. Before going too far eastward on 46th Street from Broadway, I should mention the names of some of what we call legitimate theatrical productions. In the theaters located largely on the numbered streets just off Broadway. At the Booth Theater is John Van Druten's The Distaff Side, which has been termed a dramatic masterpiece of our time. The Schubert Theater contains a dramatic play by Sinclair Lewis called Dodsworth. At the Winter Garden may be found a popular musical show of the season entitled Life Begins at 8:40. And further east in the Center Theater of Radio City, an operetta called The Great Waltz. The prices of admission at any of these average about $3 for the evening performance. I'm standing now before an office building at 125 East 46th Street, in which is located the present headquarters of the American Foundation for the Blind. Here, awaiting the completion of the new building from which we have just come, were also the sound studios of that organization where much of this record was made. Upstairs, we shall find and meet Mr. J. O. Kleber, the Foundation's staff engineer, who supervised the development of talking books, the 20th century's greatest contribution to the welfare of the blind, and who originated the idea of preserving for you this record, which Mr. Robert B. Irwin, the Foundation's executive director, has so aptly named an Ear View of 1934. Upstairs, we may meet also Miss Jane Mulfeld, Mr. Kleber's assistant, and others, and among us manage somehow to add to this Ear View. Surely, to bring to you across the years an auditory glimpse of today is no job for one man. Listen.
Floor, please. 8th floor.
You have heard the sound of the motors of this electric elevator as I was raised to the 8th floor. In a moment now, we shall have reached the studios. Ah, here we are.
Hello there, Knight. And why in the name of common sense are you carrying all that apparatus around with you?
It was your idea, Mr. Kleber, or have you forgotten already that you appointed me to record for posterity the sounds of this city in 1934?
No, indeed. Not entirely, at any rate. I'd placed so much confidence in you to carry out the assignment to startle me for the moment. By the way, how is the great work coming along?
Well, I followed out your instructions to the letter, and it seemed to me that it was about time that I dropped in on you and Miss Mulfeld for some fresh ideas.
Oh, so you already know Miss Mulfeld?
We've never met officially, but who doesn't know the most photographed girl in America?
Thank you, sir, for the compliment. But I don't really enjoy having my picture taken, and if I could see the finished product, I'm sure I'd enjoy it less.
Jane suffers from a chronic antipathy toward all photographers, because no matter what others tell her, she will insist that all the pictures taken of her, particularly by newspapers and magazines, none of them do her justice. How like a woman.
Sounds to me as though we had a traitor in our midst, or a promising mystery.
And now it's my turn to say, how like a man. Let me dissolve the mystery by telling you that I know just how my pictures look by the way I feel when they're taken. That's simple enough, isn't it? But I thought we had some problems of great moment to discuss.
Ever since we began planning our contribution to posterity, I've found myself growing smaller and smaller in my own estimation, and ideas somehow seem less important. A member of the staff, however, and by the way, let me introduce the studio secretary, Mr. Edwin Simmons. Simmons thought it would be a novel idea for each of us to speak personally to our 100-year distant descendants.
That's an exciting thought.
Yes, but there isn't time for all of us to do it. So let's have the originator carry out his own idea. Mr. Simmons, if you were given the opportunity, what would you say to your great-great-great-grandson?
If I could deliver any message to a descendant, it would be what my family has held up in a simple way as a proper code of living like this. Smile and the world smiles with you. Kick and you kick alone. For the cheerful grin will let you in where the kicker is never known.
Thank you, Mr. Simmons. That's a courageous coat of arms which ought to be suitable for any age. And now, to get on with our discussion, frankly, I'm a little worried about this record which we're going to leave for the people of the year 2034. You know, we called it an ear view. Well, on my way uptown, I've tried to present a picture of how New York sounds to the man in the street today. But what shall we do now? What other sounds and sights are characteristic of this period?
I think that practically any sound is characteristic of a given time. We identify our place in time largely by sounds, the manner of speech of a given period, the music, all the various noises. Oh, why can't we have some music? A few of the popular songs of the day.
Suppose we let the music go for the present. You are right, though, in your observation that any sound is characteristic. Why, even the ticking of a clock. Say, there's something. Let's see if we can get Summers to help us and make a short recording of the sounds made by an ordinary clock. Think of that. A clock of today in this room actually measuring off the time distance between us who sit here planning this thing and those in the future who will hear it. Then, too, it gives us an opportunity to demonstrate just how this record was made and the noises of the machinery which helped to make it. Oh, Summers.
Yes, sir.
Are the machines ready to make a short demonstration recording?
All ready whenever you are, Mr. Cleaver.
All right, Mr. Summers, you handle the recording equipment. Mr. Knight, will you please take your place at the narrator's microphone?
All right.
From that position, you will be able to observe the operators in the control room and describe incidentally what they are doing. Miss Mulfeld, I will ask you to handle the control board. I am going to take a position here in the sound room near Mr. Knight. Through the telephone headset that I'm wearing, I will be able to judge the proper intensity of the sound which are to be recorded, and in general, direct your activity. We will arrange the central microphone so that, contrary to general practice, all of our voices will be picked up. In that way, every sound characteristic to the various operations in making the recording will be heard. Are you all ready? Very well. Go ahead.
Give us a level, Mr. Knight.
I'm standing now before the master microphone in the sound recording laboratories of the American Foundation for the Blind.
Cut it there. Just a moment, Mr. Knight. It sounds badly. Try lowering your voice and speaking more slowly. Now, again.
I'm standing now before the master microphone in the sound recording laboratories of the
Sounds
American...
okay. Stand by, please, and wait for your signals, Mr. Knight. Are you ready, Mr. Summers?
Just a moment. I'll have to shave this blank a little bit. Now I'll put the wax on the table. Make a test cut. All right, the cutter's in the wax, Miss Mulfeld.
Give us the air, Mr. Summers. Go ahead, Mr. Knight.
I'm standing now before the master microphone in the sound recording laboratories of the American Foundation for the Blind. Through the window of the control room, I can see Miss Mulfeld at the switchboard, where she regulates the intensity of the sounds you are now hearing. Nearby stands Mr. Summers, anxiously watching the sapphire stylus that vibrates slightly in cadence with my voice as it bites into the soft wax of the master record. In my right hand, I'm holding a small dollar clock, and as I lean closer to the microphone, you will hear it ticking off the seconds of this day. Listen.
There's something wrong. Do you hear that foreign sound pounding in there?
I hear it now. There must be something wrong with the equipment. Shall we try a retake?
No. Run up your amplifier. Don't any of you realize what that sound is? Look at Knight's position at the table. The microphone is almost against his chest. The sound that we hear is the beating of his heart. Listen to it pound. What an echo to send into the future. The actual beating of a human heart. Move a little closer to the microphone, Mr. Knight. More volume, Miss Mulfeld. Now, listen to it.